How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Chair Talk. Guys, interesting discussion today. We're going to wrap up on our discussions with Bryan Kohberger. We've done a lot this week. So I thought today we can try to do a what if. And basically, Bryan Kohberger, what if the death penalty had stayed on the table? What would his life be like on death row in the state of Idaho? And I think it's going to be an interesting dialogue. My guest today is going to be Russ Hamilton. We've done a lot of research here to bring something to the table. Now, granted, even if it's not Bryan Kohberger, any inmate on death row, this is the life that they would be living. So we're going to break it down a little bit. Russ actually has worked on death row in San Quentin, California. So I'm sure he'll share some of his experiences as we go through it. I got some good discussion questions at the end. Plus, we'll be taking some questions here as well, since we're live. And I think it's going to be for a fun dialogue. We're going to learn in the process. Again, I took a lot of notes today, talked to a few people. So hopefully we do get a good dialogue. Let me get Russ. What up, Russ?
Anthony, how's it going, sir?
Good. Hey, Russ, you mind introducing yourself to our audience, please?
Sure. My name is Russ Hamilton. I am a former and now retired sergeant from California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. I am also a former senior juvenile correctional officer. I currently work for a company that does reentry and rehabilitation work for inmates at a local county probation department and jail where I'm a case manager. I am also a brand new author of a book called Killing Complacency, Tactical Awareness for Corrections Professionals. So any of you, that want to order that book, it is on Amazon and it's in two different formats, one of which is the online version and the other is in a paperback. I am also the founder of Keepers of Chaos with a K on Facebook, where we just basically provide camaraderie and training and, all kinds of great content and mentorship even. For anyone and everyone that is in the corrections profession, not just the badged people. And so, I think that about wraps it up for me and my little bio right there.
Yes, it does. You got a lot going on. And guys, you want to see the cover of Russ's book? I have it right here.
Yeah.
There it is.
Yeah, if you guys see that, if you look in the background there's inmates scaling down the wall while the guy is, kicked up there. And and the part on the left with the shank, that is an actual shank that I took off of an inmate way back in the day when I was doing that kind of stuff.
Hey, Russ, Dawn says hi.
Hey, Dawn. I think she just got back from Greece or something.
Is it? She's from duty, Ron. She decides to hang out.
I can't see very well, so it's anyway.
So, guys, we do have a lot going on. A lot to discuss, so let's get moving a little bit here. So again, what about if you went to death row? So we thought we could talk about what death row is like, and then obviously leaning on some of Russ's experience up at San Quentin. So just a couple of notes I got here. So in Idaho, the death penalty process is tightly controlled by state law, the Idaho Department of Corrections, which is their standard operating procedure, and a strict chain of command. So every step from sentencing the final moments is designed to ensure legal compliance, institutional security, and procedural precision. This is something that is obviously has a lot of heavy oversight, especially now because death row or the death penalty has been under a lot of scrutiny, more towards politics. But having said that, we'll kind of touch on that a little bit. Okay, so I want to talk about housing and life on death row. So real quick, Russ, you've worked at San Quentin, correct? And you worked with death row inmates, correct?
Yes, San Quentin had and still has the largest death row inmate population in the nation. I think that when I left there, I think we had over 500 death row inmates. It's kind of, renowned for back in the day when they were still carrying out executions at both Folsom and San Quentin. They were doing that by hanging. Eventually, it became San Quentin only when they instituted the gas chamber there. And then the gas chamber was done away with in the mid 90s. and they picked up doing it by lethal injection. They only ever carried out a few of those. And now the death penalty in California, even though it's technically still on the books, it's pretty much defunct thanks to a really dysfunctional government and governor there. So it's one of those things that, I spent a lot of time, in the different parts of death row at San Quentin, which for those of you that don't know, there's basically an adjustment center, which houses the grade B, which are the bad guys. And then you have East Block, which kind of houses the semi good, bad guys. And then you've got the Shelf, or what's called North Block, sixth tier, which houses the good, bad guys. And so that's essentially the way it's broken down. What's happened recently there, with them just deciding to put it in a moratorium and then dismantling the whole process, regardless of the fact that the law is still on the books. They've taken apart the death chamber and everything like that. And they've also shot many of these different inmates out to different institutions around the country. I think a lot of people are not aware of that. That has been going on. So that's kind of the current state for what it's worth here in California.
Yeah, so California has, from what I have here, 581 condemned inmates under sentence to death row. And I got, obviously, they carry out the death sentence in San Quentin. In Idaho, there's 9. One of them is a woman. And I'll get to that. But when they carry out the sentences for the women, they are taken to IMSI, the Idaho Maximum Security Institution, where death row is there, and they execute the individual. If they were to do a woman, that's where they would execute her at the IMSI. Just so you know, in California, they've executed 4 women. We have Juanita Spinelli in 1941, method was gas chamber. Louise Pete, 1947, method was gas chamber. Barbara Graham, 1955, method was gas chamber. And Elizabeth Ann Duncan, they called her mom, or Ma, and it was 1962. Method for her was gas chamber. So total executions in California is 514. At least that's the numbers I see here. 510 men, 4 are women. All right, so let me go back to the Idaho. All right, so we talked about where they're held. Okay, so all men sentenced to death are housed on the Idaho Maximum Security Institution, IMSI, south of Boise, which contains the state's execution chamber. I actually have a picture of that. I think this is it right here. Let me move this writing out of the way. The only woman under a death sentence is held at the Pocatello Women's Correctional Center. So again, and we'll get to it, but if they decide to ever execute her execution would be held at IMSI. So in Idaho, all executions today are carried out at the Idaho Maximum Security Institution, which is located near Cunha in the South Boise Prison Complex, just south of Boise. And again, for the women, currently the only woman under a death sentence in Idaho is housed at the Pocatello Women's Correctional Center. However, even in her case, if an execution were to take place, it would not be held there. Instead, she would be transferred to IMSI, where Idaho's execution chamber is located. And I think that you see that not just in Idaho or California, other states do that because that's where the death chamber is, and that's where they will bring the individuals, even if they're women, to go ahead and carry out their sentence. Now, Russ, I want to talk about the custody levels. So for an inmate that's been sentenced to death, so they're condemned, death sentence inmates are automatically classified to the highest security level. It's called close custody, meaning constant separation from the normal general prison population. That's key. So this is for Idaho, but I think it plays out for other areas as well. But close custody would be maximum security management with the strictest inmate controls outside of administrative segregation or restrictive housing. And Russ will explain the difference in that. And in Idaho terms, it means the inmate must be constantly separated from the regular general population because of their risk level, case status, or sentence. So if Bryan Kohberger was sentenced, he could still do PC in death row, but technically where he'd be housed would be with the other death row inmates. They would just control it to where he doesn't have those interactions. Like, again, you have congruent and non-congruent interactions. But hey, Russ, close custody, death row, how does that work?
So, from what I've seen around the country, talking to different people, of course, with San Quentin, having the largest death row, it's kind of dependent on what that population looks like. Of course, it's so much smaller in Idaho. It's kind of almost meaningless because they don't have the same issues, I'm sure, with keeping people apart from certain other people. At San Quentin, we had Crips and Bloods and BGF and Aryan Brotherhood and Mexican Mafia, Sureños, Norteños, all of that, housed a lot of times in pretty close proximity. But at the same time, all of them coming out of their cell, they always came out of their cell with handcuffs on. We would do these giant, relays of people just to run a yard back in the day. It's changed a lot since then, since they put the smaller, small cubicle yards in. But we would run very large yards back in the day, and we would just run these relays of guys. They would get, strip searched and then handcuffed, and then someone would bring them out, and they'd meet you halfway down the tier, and then you'd take them halfway down the tier. And the gunner was always, walking alongside you on the gun rail coming down. And because we had hundreds and hundreds of people to move back and forth like this, that was the way that we did it. Things were much more restrictive inside of the adjustment center, of course, where, we would, conduct, 2 strip searches on the way out and 2 strip searches on the way in. And most everybody in the adjustment center, it was at least 2-on-1 or 3-on-1 escort. And so, but that was, back when we did have the larger yards out there. You would have guys, 10, 15, out on a single yard. That's no longer the case. Now they, tend to run, much smaller yards, 2 to a yard, in order to try and keep down, the number of, killings and slashings and all the other, nonsense that goes on in really, hyper violent environments like that.
Guys, sometimes close custody obviously could be in units that are also highly restrictive. So if an inmate gets in trouble, they also may be able to find themselves in those types of units, but they should be managed separately from the inmates that are on death row. There should be no interaction. And also, if an inmate in death row gets in trouble, most likely there's a couple things you could do. You can move them, like Russ said, to another area still within that restrictive setting, and go ahead and treat them accordingly based on that status. Because yes, they're a death row inmate, but their status is now restrictive. Or in some cases, when there's limited room, and I've seen this happen too, you kind of take out what you got from the room, privileges that they're not supposed to have when they're on restrictive housing, and you just change the label on the door, smack, lock them in, and they don't move because it's already a close custody setting. The better way of managing them is having that separate area, of course. It just becomes a lot more manageable for staff and less confusing. But I have seen it where they just kind of change the label on the door. All right, housing. So again, like Russ said, inmates confined to a single cell or a small high security unit, often in the same building as restrictive housing. Again, I kind of just put all the close custodies within that same building, just different blocks maybe. Bryan Kohberger probably would have been on J block. No contact with general population inmates, and movements are under controlled escort, like Russ said. Out of cell time is on a set schedule, usually 1 to 2 hours per day in a secure recreation area or yard. And all movements are handcuffed behind the back with leg irons and sometimes waist chains, which are those belly chains, in some cases shackles, depending on where they're going. And guys, this is any type of movement. I was watching something on News Nation with one of the former inmates they were interviewing, like, well, why would you do that if they're just going to the shower? Anything's a controlled movement. If the shower's on the other end of the tier, it requires an escort. You pop the cell and you walk them over into that area. You let them shower, and then when they're ready to come out, pretty much everything is handled almost by like a little port. So basically, the inmate will come out, put their back against the gate, and then you go ahead and do the handcuffs, make sure it's all secured, and then you go ahead and open, and then you control the escort on the way back. But Russ, obviously, controlled escorts, like you mentioned, matter because these are dangerous individuals, and even though they may live there, if they're going to have any type of movement or interaction with staff, they need to be secured. I mean, that's just for the staff safety. Now, Russ, we'll get to programming and privileges. Limited access to programs, so education, work, religious services. And we say limited, basically, they're not going to be in probably group settings. They're going to probably have some level of one-on-one. So it's often conducted. It depends. Sometimes they'll bring them out to a caged area or a fenced area, and they will have their program there. I've seen some cases where they're just right outside their cell door, never inside the cell, but right outside the cell door. But for the most part, it's usually they get escorted down to a caged area, and then there's the one-on-one. And by the way, there's a lot going on here because they have to be stripped. You have to make sure, you meet all the security measures before you do the escort. And then even when you take them back, they have to be stripped, secured again, and brought back. So there's a lot of, it's about another 5 or 10 minutes just to get them to where they need to be, and then another 5 or 10 minutes just to get them back. So now if you have to get every inmate into some level of programming, every inmate an hour to 2 a day out of the cell, and by the way, these are controlled movements, usually one inmate to a caged, what they would consider a rec area. It takes a lot of time for each one. And when we can't meet those needs, people are just like, well, why can't you meet it? Well, that's probably why we can't, because of all the security measures it takes to move those individuals. Correct, Russ? Even like a thing like 1 hour out of cell time, that could be a lot when you got to do that for every inmate in that same manner of control, correct?
Yeah, it was what you would call, labor intensive. Because everything has to start and end with a strip search, and sometimes there's a strip search in between, and sometimes you have to have 2 or 3 or even 4 officers, potentially to move someone, and then the least little thing happens, and the rest of your schedule is pretty much shot. And so especially like the real super hyper violent guys. Every day is a crapshoot with those guys. What do we got here? Great to see the live stream. Yeah. Right on, Margaret.
All right. Thank you, Margaret. Good to have you here. So now, Russ, search and security. Now, here's another thing, guys. So when you usually take an inmate to a movement like a caged area, or maybe they're going to the shower, staff is probably going to be tied up and trying to search their cell. That's another thing. Especially, you want to be able to search their cell, and the best time to do it is when they're out of their cell. You're not going to do it while they're in their cell. So usually when they're coming down for programming, or when they're going out to yard, or when they're going to the shower, staff will try to say, okay, this is our time to go ahead and do some searches. The funny thing is, that's why a lot of inmates also turn down yard, may not shower, may not go to programming, because they may think that once they're out, they're going to get their cell searched. And another thing is, if these were 2-man cells, which they're not, but if they were, one person would go out and the other one would stay in. So that means staff would have to come in and get the other person out so they can go ahead and get those searches done. So there's a lot of stuff happening at the same time that obviously out of cell, all this stuff, it's not easy to do. It's not easy to carry out. And when people say, well, they're supposed to get out 1 hour a day. Yeah, okay, we try. The effort's there. You can't deny it, but there's also other things that have to occur. And the last thing you want to do is to let that hour out of cell time sacrifice safety and security measures. Like, you know what? We just got to get them out. Don't strip them today. Or we won't do searches. Let's get some more escorts into programming. It's a lot to manage. So again, we talked about searches and security. So frequent cell searches and pat searches should be happening in those close custody areas. Excuse me. Staff should maintain constant observation, either by camera or in-person checks. Items in the cell are minimal and heavily regulated, and sharp objects, cords, and certain personal electronics are prohibited. Interactions with staff, Russ. It's controlled approach. Staff maintain professional distance, and interactions are often through the door slot, safely done. and any legal, medical, or mental health appointments occur in secure interview booths or with restraints. Is that how it was done in San Quentin?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you were ever in a position where those restraints, had to be removed, you always had to have extra staff there. And once again, I just come down to that word, those words, labor intensive. And so, it's a huge undertaking just to move someone to medical, and then to have to do anything extra. If you have to remove restraints or something like that, then you're just, adding on and adding on. And it's not just, it's not a matter of, it's not that we're scared of the inmate. It's that these inmates tend to have proven themselves to be really untrustworthy and potentially deadly, and have been, piling up, a string of bodies over their careers. I had times where, I would have multiple notorious killers, on a single tier. And even the ones that weren't notorious, sometimes they just hadn't become infamous because just, it wasn't in the cards, but they were certainly something to be reckoned with, because it really was, just a dangerous thing to see. But, when you have all of these people of high notoriety around you, you better, be, really on top of your game. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah, and obviously there were discussions where they wanted to move death row inmates with GP inmates, but so there's a reason why they are at the highest level of close custody, is because one, prevents escape or violence. I mean, if any inmate would be motivated to escape or commit acts of violence, it definitely would be an inmate committed to death row. Reduces the risk of an inmate harming others or becoming a target themselves. So high-profile offenders are at risk in GP both ways. They could present a risk or they could be at risk. And it maintains order while still providing constitutional minimum standards for humane confinement. So daily life, inmates are housed in single cells, spending more than 22 hours a day inside. Out of cell time includes about 1 hour for exercise in a secured pen, and if staffing allows, an additional hour for kiosk or phone use, and always alone. And I want to mention something, guys. Programming, that counts as out of cell time technically. Showers, that also could count as out of cell time, because when you're pushing things minute by minute and you got to meet some standard by the end of the week, if it's 4 to 5 hours out of cell time by the end of that week, you're counting trips to medical, trips to mental health. If they're out on a court trip, hey, they're out of cell the whole day. Don't have to worry about them for that day. If they, as I said, if they got programming, they're counting all that time. Okay, so programs at work. In Idaho, it says no prison work assignments are allowed. Educational and recreational opportunities are minimal. I want to mention something, and I don't know how it is in San Quentin, Russ. Maybe you would know. I don't know if it's changed, but so usually the inmates in these areas would be responsible for cleaning their own areas, but usually have lower level status porters that when they lock down the facility, sometime, maybe overnight or early when the area is still locked down, they clean up the main areas, the generalized areas, the tiers or whatnot. But I do know some areas where the death row inmates are assigned jobs because they technically are GP. They're not problematic. And when I say GP, death row GP, and they could be given assignments to go ahead and manage the day-by-day. But most for highly restrictive units, usually it's a lower level status that may come in and do the cleaning and then leave. And there should be no interaction because they are under constant supervision from custody. Does that make sense, Russ?
Well, see, I have a little bit different on that. And if any of you out there, want to bother to pick up my book, I actually talk about the idea about the way we conduct workers and so forth as something where we often get too complacent or we get too lazy with regards to it. I was somewhat involved. I wasn't like the main person in this, but we had an issue in East Block where we had on the bay side, it was all death row, and the other two top tiers on the other side were administrative segregation, and then below that we had general population. And in this case, I know a couple of the officers I worked with, they got called into the lieutenant's office, and he told them just to sit there and be quiet for a few minutes. And they could hear something going on in back behind where his office was, which was backed up against the plumbing chase. And they managed to draw keys and go down there, and they had two of the porters that were working on the death row side, mopping the tiers and stuff like that, who were busy inside their cells making shanks. And so you can imagine, the type of problem that presented. And we ended at that time, having porters over there, and we just started having officers do it, which is what should have been doing, which is what we should have been doing all along, in my opinion. But it took that wake up call. And thank God that wake up call wasn't, an officer with a shank in his neck instead. So I know that people don't want to, mop floors, and I know that they don't want to do the cleanup and stuff, but it really is an issue. And I deal with that in my book. So I think that that's something where we should not, under any circumstances, be risking people's lives because, we think that it's inconvenient for us.
Yeah, so now we also have property and privileges, allowed items to include books, letters, a radio, MP3, TV, maybe, toiletries. In Idaho, they're saying televisions are not permitted, but I don't think that's correct. Maybe someone from Idaho can tell me, because I saw two different things, but I believe they're allowed to have televisions, but I could be wrong. So if someone's from Idaho and you see this, let me know, because I saw two things there. Visitation, only one contact visit with family or friends is allowed per year. All others are non-contact visits through glass. Attorney visits may be contact visits at any time, because again, that's legal visits. And mental health monitoring. Mental health staff conduct regular evaluations due to the psychological effects of long-term isolation. I think for the mental health, medical stuff like that, because the unit itself, the inmates aren't allowed to leave those units. They have less freedom. So usually when that happens, services are brought to them almost daily. Mental health will do their checks. Programming will do their checks. Medical will do their checks. It's just kind of where it balances out. And you may even get like administration coming down there once a week as well, just in case there's ever a concern where someone says, hey, these inmates, they're locked in. How do they write to medical? Well, there's a procedure for them to write. Obviously, they're supposed to write something, give it over to the custody, and the custody will get and drop it in the corresponding boxes. But with that said, I could also say, but if they said that custody is not taking it, I still have mental health and medical and program. They're all coming to the unit Monday through Friday to see them. So that's a pretty good balance. Now, for the next section, Russ, I got appeals and clemency. So now we're talking more on the legal side. So appeals, every death sentence is automatically reviewed by the Idaho Supreme Court. Idaho post-conviction process is one of the fastest in the nation, from what I read. The inmate has only 42 days after sentencing or direct appeal to raise all post-conviction claims. Claims not filed in this window are considered waived. And now for clemency, after appeals, the inmate may request clemency from the Idaho Commission of Pardons and Parole. If the commission recommends commutation to life without parole by a majority vote, the decision goes to the governor, who may approve or deny it. Without the commission's recommendation, the governor has no power to grant clemency. I'm pretty familiar with that practice. Would you know if that's how that's done in California?
Not off the top of my head. I think though that right now that there's certain conditions under which the governor has to approve certain types of parole, if it's for a lifer or not. Clemency is not something that we generally dealt with, other than at least not in my era. Back before that, there was a whole lot of things that went on with regards to some other inmates who were granted a form of clemency. One that pops to mind is a guy named Robert Massey, who was convicted of a murder and put on death row. And then he was able to get his sentence overturned to life, and then or to life without and then to life, and then he managed to parole, and then he managed to kill someone else, and then he managed to get back onto death row, and then he was executed. So basically in California, there's just a torturous route, no matter what happens, where they're provided what's seemingly endless appeals and seemingly endless access to the courts at both the state and federal level. And we saw this especially going forward with the Robert Alton Harris execution, which was the first one they'd done in about 30 or 31 years, if I recall correctly. He's also in my book, as a matter of fact. But in that one, he was scheduled to be executed, and he managed to go ahead and get a stay. And then he parlayed that stay, I think, into another stay. And it was just one of these things that kept snowballing. And so he got extended for like 2 years. And then coming down to the end, the California Supreme Courts and appeal courts just seemed hell-bent on actually, finding a way to save him. And then finally, at the end, the United States Supreme Court issued an edict, basically coming down from Sandra Day O'Connor, where she said no other court will file a stay without permission from this court, and that ended his appeals. And then he was finally executed very shortly after that. So there's just a lot to this, and it's a lot to take in, and it's a lot to remember. As a matter of fact, I just remembered that little gem just now after all of this time. But it was a really big deal when I was there because that was going to be the first execution in decades. So there's a lot to it.
Yeah, and guys, at one point they said Bryan Kohberger was looking to appeal, which a lot of people are like, well, can he do that? Because he accepted the plea of basically the 4 life sentences versus the death penalty. Again, if you're on the legal system, please chime in. But what I did my research for this the other day, I got on July 2nd, 2025, Kohberger pleaded guilty to 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of felony burglary. This plea agreement resulted in 4 consecutive life sentences without parole, plus an additional 10-year sentence for burglary. As part of the deal, he waived his right to appeal. Now, July 23rd, 2025, he was formally sentenced with these terms in court. Now, right to appeal despite waiver. At a court hearing, Judge Stephen Hippler lifted the gag order and cited Garza v. Idaho, noting that the U.S. Supreme Court has held that defendants can still bring an appeal even if they waive that right in a plea agreement. Garza v. Idaho established that a defendant presumed prejudice from ineffective assistance of counsel applies even when the defendant waived the right to appeal. Thus, certain constitutional challenges survive appeal waivers. So what does this mean for Kohberger? If this is the case, guys, if you're a lawyer, maybe it's better for you to chime in, but technically some avenues remain open despite his waiver. For instance, he might claim ineffective assistance of counsel, especially if his lawyer failed to file an appeal on his behalf, and he could challenge whether his plea was knowing and voluntary. These are consistent with Garza precedent, but challenging a fully negotiated plea remains difficult and limited in scope. So a lot of people believe even if he does it, it wouldn't go anywhere. All right, so now the next part I got is scheduling of the execution. By the way, there's a gentleman here that actually was at IMSI. His name is Earl Chandler, and he goes, he's done time at IMSI, so Idaho Maximum Security Institute, and he says he doesn't think Kohberger will have issues. All right, so now let's get to this next one. Scheduling the execution. So once there are no legal, so again, guys, just remember, so you have a 42-day after sentences to either to put a direct appeal or raise all post-conviction claims. That's 42 days. If you don't do that, then they waive it. So if you put a claim in it and it doesn't fit in that window, it gets waived. But I'm sure
it does. It does seem, though, that it's kind of meaningless within the Idaho system. They've only executed 3 people since 1975. So theirs, in my opinion, is almost as broken as California's is.
Right, but
because that's just for the appeal process at the state level. What they can do at the federal level, they can still manage to execute appeals from there.
So just remember, Idaho also has a lot less people on death row. They only have a total of 9.
Yeah.
One of them is a woman, and the last one they executed was a while. I believe it was 2012. Let me just verify that. Hold on. When was the last execution in Idaho? I think it was in 2000 and it's in June of 2012. But let me just double check. I have here. June of 2012, and it was Richard Albert Leavitt was executed by lethal injection for the 1984 murder and mutilation of Donyette Elg, and he remains the latest person executed in the state. Prior to that, state executed Paul Ezra Rhodes on November 18, 2011, also by lethal injection. And before the modern era of lethal injection, Idaho's last execution by hanging was in 1957, which was the execution of Raymond Allen. And the first post-Furman lethal injection was in 1994, and that was the execution of Keith Wells. So there's 4. But again, they don't have the numbers. All right, so schedule and execution. So this is how the process would work. So once there are no legal barriers, so we passed the 42-day mark, there's no appeals going through, and there's no type of post-conviction release or challenges. Once there are no legal barriers, the trial court issues a death warrant. By law, the execution date must be set within 30 days of that order. So that's just the date. It doesn't have to be set in 30 days. I mean, it has to be set by 30 days, if that makes sense. So basically, you don't have to, you're not setting the date. You know what I'm trying to say, right? Like it doesn't have to be within 30 days. You're setting the date, but the date doesn't have to be within the 30 days. If that makes sense. That was a lot easier to explain in my head, but hopefully people get that. So immediately after the warrant is issued, IDDOC informs the inmate and their attorneys. So now they know the death warrant has been issued. The victims' families get notified, and the governor, attorney general, board of corrections, and other state officials. The inmate is moved to death watch, so they're placed in a secure observation cell under 24/7 watch by 2 officers, and every movement is logged. Medical and mental health staff notified to begin close monitoring. Russ, you familiar with that process, Russ, with the death warrant?
Yeah, they did. They had a similar process at San Quentin. I want to say, and I could be wrong about this. I think it was like 72 hours or so before it was to be carried out. They would move the person closer down to the execution chamber, and then that way there was not as big a chance for something to go wrong. Trying to move them out from where other inmates might see that and try and do something about it. Which was always a concern. A lot of times, I won't say a lot of times, but I think there might have been 2 or 3 instances where Robert Alton Harris was moved down there and moved back. I could be wrong about that, but I know that it wasn't that unusual for a sudden stay to come through, and then the death penalty would be off the table for another year or 2, and that happened with several individuals. And the California process at one time actually almost got back up and cooking again. I think after Robert Alton Harris, I think that maybe there was 11 after that. That might be a little bit generous, but it seems like that was the case. I can recall several to my mind just off the top of my head. So
yeah, and I have to make a correction. So I got people I spoke to, and then I just did some research. It does have to be carried out within the 30 days. So I apologize, guys. So when a court issues a death warrant, the execution date must be set for no later than 30 days from the date the warrant is signed. There's no minimum waiting period. That's what I misunderstood. Once the warrant is issued, the execution could technically happen in a few days, but 30 days is the absolute limit. So here's the timeline. Day 0, death warrant signed, execution date set, must be less than or equal to 30 days away. Within 5 days of that, Idaho DOC director certifies to the court whether lethal injection chemicals are available, because in Idaho, lethal injection is the primary, firing squad is the secondary, but now they're pushing possibly in July of 2026 to make firing squad the primary. And they're also looking to mechanize it, to make it more mechanical as opposed to having human involvement. So now, if available, it's lethal injection. If not, it's firing squad. And again, we'll get into this a little bit, but sometimes it's hard to get the drugs for the lethal injection. So that's why firing squad is being pushed for the primary method. And then day 0 to 30, inmate placed in close custody, execution watch, and preparations begin. And on or before day 30, execution carried out at Idaho Maximum Institution. So that's like kind of like the four. If it's not carried out in 30 days, if the execution cannot be completed within the 30-day window, for example, due to court stay, lack of chemicals for the lethal injection, or other issues, the death warrant expires. A new death warrant must then be issued by the court, restarting the process. So, all right, so let's see. It's pretty complicated. So obviously, so once you get the death warrant, now you start setting the inmate in motion. You now make sure they're under constant watch, 24 hours a day, 7-day, watch by 2 officers, every movement logged, medical and mental health staff notified to begin close monitoring. And now you have, let me just get over here now. Now you have the legal preconditions. So death warrants can only be issued after a death sentence is handed down and at least 42 days have passed since the judgment or post-conviction ruling. This 42-day window allows the inmate to file all known post-conviction claims and ineffective assistance of counsel claims or other legal challenges, which I think Kohberger may try to do. And then here comes the issuance of the death warrant. Judge signs warrant and sets execution date. The execution date must be no more than 30 days from the warrant issued, as we talked about, from the warrant's issuance. At issuance, inmate is immediately moved, we talked about, into the close custody highest security classification, constant separation from general population, 24/7 staff observation. Then you have the method certification. So this is where, as we just mentioned, within 5 days, the director has to sign off on the method. So within 5 days of the warrant, director of Idaho DOC files an affidavit to the court, confirms whether lethal injection is available. If available, lethal injection is the method. If not available, default method is firing squad. Idaho law 2025 makes firing squad the mandatory fallback, and the primary method start in July of 2026, which I just said. And then the pre-execution security measures for housing. So again, single cell and secure unit, often restrictive housing unit or execution watch cell at IMSI, continuous staff presence or camera monitoring, movement escorted in full restraints for any movement outside cell, no contact with general population, privileges are strictly limited visits, non-contact only, controlled phone and commissary access, legal counsel visits arranged under secure conditions, I'm sure Russ will come back, and documentation. Staff maintain detailed log entries at least every 30 minutes, and special suicide prevention and health checks are in place. And then you have the execution day protocol. So conducted at Idaho Maximum Security Institutions, I read, near Cunha, even for women who are naturally housed at Pocatello. So the execution would have been carried out in IMSI. Witnesses may include the victim family members, media representatives, and official observers. Inmates escorted to chamber, secured, and last statement offered. Method carried out as certified, which in this case will either be lethal injection or firing squad, and the warden declares official time of death. Post-execution requirements is executioner files for return to court, and then confirm time, method, and conduct of execution, and then the body's released according to next of kin or coroner arrangements. But I do want to go back to the final 48 hours. That was all related to the schedule of the execution and the carrying it out. But I want to go back to the final 48 hours and let you know what is offered to the inmate during those 48 hours before their execution. This is pretty interesting. Hold on, we got some people coming. Hey everyone, hello everyone. Hi Nika. Don't forget, guys, try to share this out. Try to build up on those subscribers. All right, Russ. So this is what I got for the first 48. Security. Facility shifts into heightened security mode with restricted movement and access. We talked about that. Meals. The inmate's final meal must be chosen from the standard Idaho Department of Corrections menu. It's served at 7 p.m. the night before execution. They're not allowed to order whatever they want. They can only get what's on the menu. I know a lot of people think that they cannot because it became extremely costly and people were playing games with it. So they're allowed to get what they want. That's on the IDOC menu. Communication cutoff. All personal calls and visits end exactly 24 hours before, except for the attorneys. And sometimes they do that also because it relates to safety and security as well. You don't want those last-minute phone calls. God forbid there's a way for someone to manage an escape through those phone calls. So they cut off all phone calls within the 24 hours, except for the contact with their lawyers. The spiritual advisor, one approved advisor may be present. Request must be made 14 days before with warden approval. The advisor can be in the chamber during the execution. With that said, the advisor cannot work for the Idaho Department of Corrections, from what I'm being told, and they are allowed to witness, but if they want to be in the chamber, they have to get the approval from the warden. They have to put that request in 14 days in advance. And medical preparation. Sedatives may be offered at 23 hours before, and again, no later than 4 hours before the execution. And the medical team checks all equipment, prepares chemicals, and stages the chamber. Now, again, we're preparing for the lethal injection. And I actually have some questions later on for you, Russ, about why some of this stuff is done. But, Russ, does this sound a little similar to what you've witnessed?
You know, the whole lethal injection thing was really just, coming online. They had changed things in the gas chamber initially to use that, and then after I had left San Quentin, they had built a separate facility for it, is what I was told. But one thing that we have seen across the country is a problem with getting those chemicals, and for people, kind of, taking protests and so forth, into their own hands to try and stop these things. So that in and of itself has become an issue for using these chemicals. And that's why Idaho and I want to say Utah, looked back at just using a firing squad all over again.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'll look into that, but I think you're right. It's those two states. Oh, no. South Carolina executed somebody through a firing squad last year.
Oh, yeah, I believe they did. Yeah.
I believe which states utilize firing squads? I think South Carolina just put one. Idaho, Utah, South Carolina, Oklahoma, and Mississippi. The last firing squad execution in U.S. was in, it's South Carolina. Let me just see some. If you want, did South Carolina have a firing squad? I think they did it last year. I remember reading something about that. Let me just double check. Yes, South Carolina has indeed carried out executed by firing squad on earlier this year, March 7, 2025, South Carolina executed Brad Keith Sigmund by firing squad, the first such execution in the U.S. in nearly 15 years. He chose this method over lethal injection, and then shortly thereafter, on April 11, 2025, Mikhail Dean Mahdi was also executed by firing squad, becoming the second person executed by this method in South Carolina and the fifth in the U.S. since 1976. So yeah, I knew South Carolina. I thought it was earlier than that. But okay, witnesses and access. So for witnesses and access, I have Idaho Department of Corrections policy limits execution witnesses to up to 2 victims' family members, up to 2 witnesses chosen by the inmate's attorney, 1 approved spiritual advisor, and select state officials, so the governor representative attorney general representative, local sheriff, prosecutor, and judge. Usually the local sheriff is really the maybe the sheriff from the county where the crime was committed. And 4 approved media representatives. And again, I'm reading that from what I saw. So 4 approved media representatives. Witnesses are kept in 2 separate rooms, one for the state's witnesses and one for the inmates to prevent interaction. And that makes sense. And transparency. Since 2024, witnesses can watch a live video feed of the preparation phase, including IV or central line placement, before seeing the execution directly in the chamber. I remember that being an issue too. I think there was a push for media to want to see the preparation, and people wanted to keep that a little bit secret. And there was lack of transparency towards that, and that was actually putting a lot of executions to halt too. Do you remember that, Russ, ever being discussed?
I don't remember it as necessarily a showstopper, but I know that there, were issues with regards to the chance that those materials could be let out, and that's a huge security issue, especially for those individuals that are, employed by the Department of Corrections. That could be targeted for that. Even if they're not wearing name tags and so forth, there are people that could still identify them who know them, from interactions, and they could be targeted. So I think that was what some of that was about. I don't know that it actually stopped or delayed any of them, but there are real, true security things, and I know that everyone screams for transparency. But there's some points beyond which transparency doesn't help you anymore. We know what was going on. We knew what happened in the court. We knew that the person was, sentenced to death, and now it's being carried out. It's being carried out by people who, were in no other ways, involved with the crime or the courts or anything else. So I think that's kind of a little bit of a specious argument on the part of some people.
Yeah, and then for the lethal injection, they have 4 ways. I saw that they could carry it out. Guys, I'm to pronounce some of these names here, but one of them is with sodium thiopental, then pancuronium bromide, and then potassium chloride, which stops the heart, and then with saline flushes between drugs. So they clear out one, bring out the other. Then there's another one where it's phenobarbital, then pancuronium bromide, then potassium chloride with saline flushes. So that one, almost the same. And then you also have a single drug, which is the phenobarbital, 5 grams, followed by the saline flush. And then if they were doing the firing squad, if lethal injection drugs are unavailable or lethal injection is ruled unconstitutional, execution may be carried out by firing squad. The inmate is restrained in a chair with the target over the heart. A team of trained marksmen fires rifles from a set distance and conducted in a modified secure chamber to contain rounds and protect safety. I saw this picture on the internet. That was a drawing, but that's sort of how it looks. If it was done by firing squad. Now what I'm hearing is they're trying to mechanize it. Okay, so hold on one second. Got some comments coming here. Thank you for watching. People are just thanking us. I see Eric and Ralph for having a good question, or Zephiel. Okay, so here's the next part. Execution day procedures. So again, we're talking about the 48. I was funny because Eric said, I have to show the first 48. They should have the last 48, and this should be the show. Yeah, it was funny. Execution day procedures, team structure. So the administrative team oversees the entire process, ensures legal compliance, and coordinates logistics. Escort team moves and secures the inmate, maintains chamber security. And medical team establishes IV or central line, prepares and administers chemicals. Now that would be, again, for the lethal injection. Legal protections for staff. Idaho law shields all participants from civil or criminal liability and protects their professional license. Their identities and the identity of drug suppliers are confidential by law. That was another thing, too. People were trying to find out more about at least who's supplying the drugs. And there were a lot of people that didn't want their name connected to the execution. They were like, well, our drugs are meant to do good things and not meant to be utilized for this. That's why it's becoming harder to get the drugs. And emergency backup. 3 complete chemical sets, A, B, and C, are prepared in advance. An ambulance and medical staff are on standby until the execution is complete. As we mentioned, for the layout for the lethal injection, 2 witness rooms with soundproof glass. So you have your state side and the condemned side. Execution chamber with gurney or firing squad setup, which I did have a picture of the other one too. That's for the lethal injection. Preparation room for IV or central line insertion, and then medical team room and equipment and chemical storage. Now, I wanted to do this too. I wanted to do training requirements if staff need any specialized training. So IDCO policy requires escort and medical teams to train at least 10 times annually when executions are anticipated. Minimum of 4 training sessions in the year before an execution to remain eligible. Full rehearsal simulating the entire process from death watch to declaration of death. Medical team must practice IV and central line placement, including on live volunteers, and all staff rehearse communication procedures, chamber setup, and emergency responses. So there's a lot that goes in this process. Russ, are you familiar with any of this?
Yeah, that was always a huge thing, because everything has to go off without a hitch, including things like we had to have 2 or 3 separate phone lines, and they would make sure that those phone lines were clear to the governor's office every so many minutes, because no one wanted to be the one that, hey, we went ahead and did it, and guess what, the phone lines were down. I knew some of the people that were involved with the execution team, and they were trained, and I believe that they were also prohibited from working on death row, at least in a constant capacity. So between all of those things, it's just a lot of stress and a lot of stressors put on a lot of different people, including obviously the inmate. But it's just one of those things where you can't afford for anything to go wrong. We've seen recently across the country where apparently there were some issues, especially with lethal injection. I know that there was, I want to say, in Georgia, a push to go to nitrogen executions, where they would just have a person breathe in nitrogen, and it's supposedly very quick, very painless, and supposedly foolproof. I guess it remains to be seen whether or not we're going to see more of that. Firing squads seem to me like one of those things that they may not be well advised in doing that, because it seems like something that people could get behind with regards to, stop the violence, stop the killing, and really pump people up for potentially some big protests or so forth. But that's just the way that I see it. I think that the nitrogen is probably going to end up what we're going to see more of. But who knows? There could be controversies with that as well. And I know that there were some people that were always saying, no, it's not as compassionate as some people want to make it out to be.
Yeah, guys, Tennessee actually on August 9th had a bad execution due to lethal injection. On August 9, 2025, Byron Black, a 69-year-old intellectually disabled inmate, was executed by lethal injection at the Riverbend Maximum Security Institution in Nashville. Witnesses report alarming signs that something had gone terribly wrong. Black groaned, repeatedly lifted his head, and reported saying, "Oh, it's hurting so bad" during the procedure. His implanted defibrillator, which raised concerns among his attorneys, was later confirmed not to have activated during this execution. So that's interesting. The execution has sparked condemnation for its apparent cruelty, especially considering his severe health conditions and the fact that his intellectual disability would likely make him ineligible under current legal standards. And it's funny because they were worried about the defibrillator, but they're saying that they later confirmed that it wasn't activated. They were assuming that, as they were trying to slow down the heart, that the defibrillator would keep it moving, and that those reactions were related to the pacemaker. But then there's some information here. It says that it was confirmed that it was never activated. Why it matters unprecedented Yeah, unprecedented, yeah, distress. Witnesses described the execution not as peaceful, but as visibly agonizing, raising alarms about the method and its application. And this incident has intensified scrutiny of Tennessee's execution protocols, prompting calls for autopsy reports, data transparency, and reassessment of lethal injection practices, especially given criticism over use of phenobarbital, which is that one drug stop. It's the one drug before you do the saline wash, as opposed to the other ones that have 3 or 4. This one just has one. And the case underscores ongoing procedural failures, such as lax drug testing that has previously delayed execution in the state. Okay, that was a concern too, that the phenobarbital, like it's supposed to be the one drug that takes you out. People are like, well, how do you know if the person's in pain or not? But again, if it looks like the pacemaker, from what I'm reading, but maybe someone else knows differently, it didn't activate. So now people are going to focus more on the issuing of the drug. So now for the execution, Russ, the inmate is escorted, as we talked about, the preparation room where the IV or central line is placed. Witnesses view this VIA live feed. So this is the preparation side, where before they weren't allowed to see all this. They would just see the curtain open and then the person was already, situated. Now they start to see the prep. The inmate is moved into the chamber, secured to the gurney or firing squad chair, and given the opportunity for final words. For lethal injection, the drugs are given in the approved sequence. For firing squad, the warden gives the signal to fire. And then a coroner confirms the death, and the warden files the return of death warrant with the court. Now let's get to after the execution. So it's pretty good. A lot of stuff learning here. So let's get to after the execution. The body is released to the coroner. If claimed by family, it's released to them. Otherwise, the state arranges burial. The IDOC holds a media briefing to confirm the time and manner of death, but does not release staff identities. And Russ, you've seen that as a problem, right? Where they were trying to get more transparency. And I know they wanted the person distributing the drugs if it was lethal injection. But I do believe some people did try to request staff identities, which is protected, because you know that even if staff retire, if they're involved, they're still not allowed to talk about what happened on the carrying out of that execution. You know that, right, Russ? They signed something that actually lasts for even past their retirement. They cannot talk about it.
Yeah, I believe that's probably the case. I don't know if that would necessarily, hold up. What action could you really take? But I know that no one is going to want to disclose that they were involved in that, simply because there's a lot of anti-death penalty people out there who, while they may believe passionately in what they believe in, they can also be somewhat unhinged over it. We've also seen, of course, there could be issues with STGs. One of the executions I was not there for, but one of the most concerning ones, probably in death penalty history, was the execution of Tookie Williams, the founder of the Crips, because he was such an iconic figure, and it was one of those things where we were given repeated warnings about being careful discussing it on prison grounds, about going home, not covering up, making sure that you had your off-duty weapon. All those things were part of that, even at institutions where he wasn't at. So that was a grave concern with that one, because that individual did have a great deal of influence over a great many people.
Yeah, and Gino got it right. Lifetime. It's a lifetime non-disclosure. The reason why I know about that is when I first did Tier Talk back in 2012, there was a gentleman I interviewed from Texas who ran a museum, but he also oversaw death row for a while. He would talk about things in general, but would not talk specifics about who he executed, stuff like that. But he would talk about certain methods and stuff like that, how it was carried out. But if you were to say, hey, did you do this execution or that one? Because he did, I think it was 80 of them. He could not talk, and he would not talk about it. So there's something there. And by the way, if no one decides to pick up the body, I wanted to add this too. So let's say, no one wants to pick up the body once the body is deceased. This kind of deals with just a death in general, but would also apply here for the carrying of a death sentence. It gets released to the coroner immediately after the execution. The body's turned over to the county coroner where the execution took place. So for Idaho, that's Ada County. For the IMSI execution, at least that's what's in here. The coroner conducts any required examination or documentation, and Idaho law states requires that the coroner make reasonable attempts to notify next of kin and allow them the opportunity to claim the remains. By the way, I'm sure the facility is going to be helping out with that too. So let's just say we couldn't get in touch with the next of kin. Or let's just say it's a regular death. You couldn't get in touch with next of kin. Family's going to, social services, everybody's going to try to make an effort, the investigative division, because this is something you really have to cross your T's and dot your I's with, because let's say you miss out on a family member and they want the body and it's too late. So you are going to do whatever you can. You're going to check their visit card, their phone numbers. You're going to check their property. Who are they writing to? Check their mail. You're going to do everything. Work with the investigative division, see who they've been speaking to, social services, what numbers were updated. And if you can't find anybody after all of that, after all those exhaustive measures, because you can find people and they don't want nothing to do with it, then okay, then they want nothing to do with it. I'll know I made the phone call, but now they push the matters on us. But if you can't find anybody after that, they say it's usually about 48 hours. I've seen 72 or maybe a little bit more, but mostly within 48 hours or 72 hours. But I guess it varies. That's what it says here. If the body's on claim, if no one claims the body within a legal time frame, it may be turned over to a state anatomical board for research or teaching, but only if consent laws and eligibility rules are met, or more commonly, the body's buried at state expense in a designated cemetery, sometimes within the prison system's own burial grounds. For Idaho, this is what I saw. Idaho DOC maintains records of the burial location. Graves are typically marked only with minimal identification, so name, ID, DOC number, or plot number. Now, if you guys from Idaho, maybe you could confirm that. And that's to protect staff and avoid vandalism. If the inmate had no money, indigent, costs are covered by the state burial fund. So there's a burial fund. And IDOC will hold a media briefing confirming inmate's name, time and manner of death, general handling of the body without giving private family details, and then the identities of execution team members remain confidential by law. All right, so I just wanted to add that because some people may ask what happens to the body if no one claims it. All right, so now I got we're kind of almost wrapping up here, guys. There was a lot covered here today, but I want to do the next part is related insight and recent updates. I wanted to look at, make sure there's any updates. All right, so in response to a lawsuit filed by major news outlets, a federal judge now requires that media witnesses be allowed to observe the entire lethal injection process, including drug preparation, previously hidden from view. This aims to enhance transparency during executions. We touched on that. Idaho has begun using central venous lines as a backup method.
That's where they put a central line in, so that there's so that there's nothing going on down here. If they can't get a vein or whatever, that's already in place. That's actually a surgical procedure. So
yeah, they said this change followed a botched execution attempt where staff struggled to establish an arm vein. The chamber has been remodeled to support this method, and the procedure is visible via a closed-circuit video during the preparation phase. In a significant policy shift, we talked about this as well, Idaho has passed legislation making the firing squad the primary method of execution, which will be effective July 1st of next year, 2026, with lethal injection as the alternative. This change reflects both logistical challenges and evolving legal direction. Okay, Russ, I got 5 quick discussion questions. So what I'm going to do here, Russ, is I'm going to read the discussion question. I got some bullets that I was working on by the pool today, and then if you don't mind, if you could give me your take on some of these. And I kept these very generalized. And if you guys are enjoying the show, let me know, please, just so I know, because we may do more lives. So please hit up in the comments if you're enjoying it. All right, so this is the question, Russ, and I'll ask you again after I give you the bullets. But preparation versus humanity. How do you think staff balance the need for strict protocol with the human reality of ending someone's life? Actually, let's do this. Before I do the bullets, have you answer first so I don't bias your answer. So again, Russ, how do you think staff balance the needs for strict protocol with the human reality of ending someone's life?
So I think that's a really good question. When I break it down inside my mind, I think about what that nurse or doctor attending medical personnel, having to find a vein or touch the person and know that this is something that's not therapeutic. It's anti-therapeutic. Now, on the other side of that equation, one of the things that that person obviously will know is that this person, did something of such a heinous nature that a jury, actually convicted them. And a lot of these, are high notoriety cases, and so there's the level of that too. But that doesn't mean that they couldn't have a traumatic response to it. Ending someone's life in such a cold and calculating manner really does, bring with it a lot of different stressors. With regards to the more regular staff and not the medical staff, they are ones that also can be affected by it, even though they're not necessarily pulling the switch or firing the bullet or whatever. But they have been instrumental in bringing this person to their death and handing them over to those who are actually carrying it out. Is there a mental price for that? I'm sure that there is. And I think that the fact that that there is so much, and for lack of better terminology, I don't want anyone to hit me up on this, but I think you'll know what I mean. But when I say something like pomp and circumstance, this is in a way a ritualized killing. Make no mistake about that. So I think that when we look at all of those things, it's something that we, have to take under advisement. And I would say, I think that you should, rotate a team. They get one time, they're involved with the execution, and that's their first one, and that's their last one. Because I want to be as kind and professional and caring for staff as is possible. So I don't know if I hit any of the bullet points, but let's see.
No, okay, so you did mostly. So let me hit up with these boring bullet points. So I got ensures legal compliance. Oh, wait, hold on. I just lost the section. Ensures legal compliance and removes potential for procedural errors. That's common sense. Keeps process consistent regardless of personal opinions or inmate notoriety, and reduces vulnerability to legal appeals or accusations of misconduct. So it's good to have a process that's documented that people have agreed on. The humanity considerations, this is where some people may see it as a bit more subjective. Recognizing the condemned is still a person, deserving of dignity in final moments, regardless of what they've done. Using calm, respectful communication without altering security measures, and acknowledging emotional impact on the inmates' families and the victims' families. So here's the balancing act. Compartmentalizing emotions while avoiding cold detachment. And ain't that the balance of correctional work? If anybody wanted to know the balance of correctional work, it's compartmentalizing emotions while avoiding cold detachment. Maintaining empathy without allowing it to disrupt performance of duties. And Russ talks about tactical empathy. So this is tactical empathy at a whole nother level. And finding the threshold where compassion and protocol can coexist. So why it matters: sets the moral tone for the institution and its staff, impacts public trust in the justice system. So again, these are people that want justice to be carried out, and shapes the emotional legacy for the staff involved, how they live with the memory. I thought you did very well, Russ. Anything you want to add after reading that or hearing that?
Just the part with regards to, safety and security, my bread and butter. This is a very grave thing, no pun intended, that is, being carried out. And so with so little room for error, you better have your policy and procedure down. One of the things that Idaho, I think, recently did, by writing in the, I want to say it was with regards to the firing squad, is nobody had any real idea that was coming, and they were suddenly, scrambling to try and figure it all out. after all of these years. And it just looked to me like it was kind of, done willy-nilly. And there's no willy or nilly to be had in situations like that.
Eric caught me making a misspell. Okay, just wanted to touch on something else too. Idaho law and execution participation. We kind of touched on it, but Idaho statutes and Department of Corrections standard operating procedure makes it clear participation is voluntary for all DOC employees. Staff may decline for personal, moral, religious, or psychological reasons without penalty. This protection exists because execution work can cause serious emotional and mental health strain, and forcing participation could invite legal challenges. Selection of execution team. The IDOC director handpicks the execution team from staff who volunteer. Volunteers are vetted for reliability under pressure, ability to follow exact procedures, and emotional resilience. Most states, including Idaho, offer special compensation for or additional pay for execution duty. Psychological safeguards. Even volunteers are offered confidential counseling before and after the execution. Some states rotate staff in and out of roles, like Russ said, to reduce long-term trauma. Idaho uses a specialized small trained group that practices for months ahead of time. Federal and ethical context. The American Correctional Association standards say participation in execution should be voluntary. Federal precedent recognizes the First Amendment and conscience rights of staff, and forcing an officer to participate could be seen as compelled speech or conduct in violation of constitutional rights. So bottom line, in Idaho, correctional staff cannot be mandated to take part in the execution. Only trained volunteers serve, and they can withdraw at any time before the procedure. Was that the same in Cali?
Yes, it was definitely. It was all volunteers. They were people who all never really talked about what it was that they were training for. I did happen to know some of them, but they were very quiet about that aspect of their service.
Hey Russ, real quick, what's your thoughts? Because Eric made a good point. Incentivized pay, right here. Sorry, let me get it. Incentivized pay for death row staff. California did that.
I believe that they were given some extra pay, but I could not, with surety say that was the case. Often on special details, though, people would get a little bit extra. Even for things like, bilingual pay, and certain things. So that's not really anything, out of the ordinary. And so I believe that to be the case, but I would not swear to it.
I got something here. It says Idaho Department of Correction doesn't publicly post the exact rate, but documents obtained through public records show team members are paid a flat special duty stipend for execution-related work on top of their regular salary. This covers both training time and day of the execution. Guys, let me know if you're from Idaho if this is true. Pay is designed to recognize the exceptional responsibility and emotional strain, encourage enough qualified volunteers to staff the team, and offset the overtime and schedule disruption involved in the months of rehearsal. While Idaho keeps its figures discreet, other states' public pay schedules give a sense of the range. So I got something here. South Carolina is a $500 bonus for execution duty. Guys, I would look this up a little bit more, but this is what's coming my way. So if you're from these areas, let me know if this is true. Texas, overtime pay plus a $250 to $500 execution stipend. Missouri, $500 to $1,000 for direct participation. Utah, execution pay can reach $1,000 for chamber staff. And Florida is $150 to $500 bonus per execution. Tell me if that's correct, guys. I'm curious about that. Recruitment. Not every staff member is willing to participate, so extra pay helps, like Russ said, to ensure enough qualified volunteers. Recognizes that the work is above and beyond normal correctional duties. Helps retain trained personnel for future execution so the DOC doesn't have to constantly retrain new people. And confidentiality. Bonus pay can also be rolled into paychecks in a way that doesn't public flag an officer as an executioner. Now, it said there's Idaho's exact execution team pay structure for the last publicly available execution record was for Richard Leavitt. And that was the one we mentioned in 2012. And this is what it says here. Idaho does pay execution team members extra, but the exact amounts, as I said, are not public. Okay, so let me see if it says secrecy around money flows, drug costs to public staff is not. So we have exact leaked numbers for drug purchases, anywhere from 15,000 in 2012 to 50,000 for 15 grams of phenobarbital in 2023, but nothing official on individual team stipends. That gap is because of Idaho's secrecy. So guys, so they may not know what the staff's being paid, but back in 2012, whatever the drugs they used for lethal injection was 15 grand, but now for was 15 grand, but now for 15 grams of phenobarbital, it costs the state $50,000. So for every 3 inmates, the state is paying $50,000. What is it, around 16 and change for each inmate? 16, 16, 32, or almost 17. That's interesting. Good night, Gino. That's the next question, Russ. This is about transparency, Russ. So I won't bias you. So I'll ask you the question, then we'll go over the bullets, see if you hit the mark. There's 5 of these questions, then we can wrap it up. So there's 3 more left after this one. Transparency, Russ. This one's for you. Does allowing witnesses to see the preparation phase increase trust in the process, or does it make the experience harder for everyone involved?
I mean, that's a good question. I think that because of the heightened passions of people with regards to this, both for and against, that it probably actually damages the process. I would say, and I'm fully willing to acknowledge what my biases are, and I have a distinct distrust and dislike for most members of the media, those who call themselves journalists, because I've caught so many of them in lies and so forth. And so, am I biased and a little bit, jaundiced with respect to that? Certainly, the fact that they want to go in there and do something that sells newspapers, and I say newspapers, but that gets them clicks, sells them newspapers, allows them to jack up their advertising rates. I'm not a big fan of what they do. So that, on the other hand, being able to show the process is that going to give some people the thought that the process can be more trusted, and that we could have a more robust death penalty kind of thing. But then again, when we see what's happened in California, in spite of the fact that Californians in the past have overwhelmingly, voted for the death penalty, I just don't know what the answer is. There doesn't seem to be any good answers anymore, and I think that's about all I'm going to say about that.
No, Russ, I think you hit it all. Before I read the bullets, I want to mention something. Obviously, now that even with correctional agencies, we're putting in body-worn cameras, so now people expect more transparency, especially now. Like, it would be reports. Now it's not about the reports. They want to see cameras and then the report. So the cameras are what validates the reports that the officers wrote. Where back in the day, all you had was what the officers wrote. My problem is sometimes there are people that you let in that, when you give too much transparency, they question the process, but not out of curiosity, out of pure judgment. And they look to challenge the system more. And I think that's where it becomes an issue, because automatically, when we read that article from the guy from Byron Black from Tennessee, now I if that's a true update about them making the discovery that it was the defibrillator was never activated, but when it was put in the news, the first thing they ran with, because it's the first person to cover a story, would be the complication. Because they have to get that story out as quick as possible, because it's a race to get the views. But then later on, when you find out it's not that big of a deal, it's already set its motion. It's hard to change the mindset once you put it out there, because then now people think, oh, they're just covering it up. It's like, no, the story was released without facts, and now we go to tell you the truth, but the truth that we have to say no longer matters, because now it's our effort to cover up. And maybe one day we could do a show on proactive and reactive messaging. Because you even see that with serial killers too. So these are the bullets, Russ. I think you pretty much covered it, but provides public accountability and reassurance that the process is humane and legal. offers victims' families confirmation that justice is carried out, very simple stuff, helps counter misinformation or conspiracy narratives. Arguments against transparency: witnesses may experience unnecessary trauma for observing the full process. And by the way, guys, I've actually know of that happening where I had someone on the show years ago, and sadly, I think it was when I only did the podcast, so I don't know if I have that audio. But they witnessed the person who committed the crime against their loved one. They witnessed them being executed, and it was such a horrible thing for them to watch, regardless of what they felt they owed their family member. It's something that they said was not easy to do. Again, it's part of carrying out justice. They felt that they owed it to the victim, but was not a good experience for them. As much as you want that end result, watching it happen, the person told me, was a bit more difficult than they thought it would be. Emotional reactions from witnesses could disrupt staff's focus, and the public may misinterpret routine actions as cruelty, which we talked about. Impact on staff: added pressure of knowing every action is scrutinized, possible reputational impact from witness perception, and need for heightened professionalism under emotional circumstances. And why it matters: well, it balances the public's right to know with the emotional well-being of all present, can either build or erode trust in the institution depending on execution quality. So Tennessee may not have went well. And sets a precedent for how much of state-sanctioned punishments should be public. Now, Russ, question 3, and I will not give you the bullets. I won't bias you. Why is so much emphasis placed on repeated training for execution teams, and how might that training affect staff emotionally?
That's really, just an outgrowth of everything that we experience inside corrections with regards to potential liability and negative press. Nothing that we ever do inside corrections is ever good enough for the media. And that's why I get back to, having a very distinct issue and bias with regards to those people, as it were. No matter how good we are at carrying out our duties, they will always find something lacking. Now, that doesn't mean that I want things covered up. I've been the first one. I mean, when I write my Substack, when I have what I've written inside my new book, what I have discussed on these programs has always been, if we're in the wrong, we're in the wrong. But so many times, they want to make mountains out of molehills. So I think that is the chief thing that I look at with regards to that. And I just want a chance to be able to make an impact, mostly for public safety, but a lot to do with staff safety, and definitely an element of there with inmate safety. I mean, I've saved a lot of inmates, and been there when they were, receiving the beat down and stopped it. So anyway, I think that's kind of like my roundabout way of getting to that. I don't know if I hit any bullet points or not.
No, you did. And I'll go over to, hey, Russ, real quick, though. I probably would. I don't know if you would. Eric asked an interesting question. Would you pay a fee to see an execution if you haven't done one already? Like, I wouldn't mind, only because, not to be callous, but full circle of my career, I've never seen one carried out. I would like to see one, if it's something I can handle. What about if I was put in that position? Could I carry out the justice? But also to see it, to be able to see how it really plays out. I would love to see the whole 48 hours, even, interact with the inmate who has a couple of days left, and just try to, it's, for me, it would be a learning thing, learning a lot about myself as well. What's your thoughts, Russ?
So I actually talk about in my book, one of the first shifts that I actually worked, I was on the I don't know what you'd call it. It was the death watch of Robert Alton Harris. And it wasn't anything all that big. It's just that, once they serve them, with the death warrant, they basically get someone that, is sitting there across from them, watching them for 24/7. And so it was just, my turn in the barrel. And so I showed up, and it was on, North Block on the shelf. And so basically, I was the, I think I was the gunner, or at least, I had a pistol, and I was just, sitting there, gonna watch what was going on. And there was an additional 2 gunners there, I think, if I recall correctly. And, he was just talking to the sergeant, and I didn't really even know anything about the guy other than, he was there talking to the sergeant. I was supposed to watch him. And if anything went hinky, I was supposed to shoot him. And, after he was done talking to the sergeant, someone came over and relieved me, because the sergeant's, waving me down. And, and he's telling me, he says, you heard all that bull crap coming out of his mouth about, how he was caring for people, and he, and he'd pull over and change people's tires and all this stuff. He says, I want you to always remember that, he stole 2 kids' cars and took them out in the forest, and then shot and killed them, and then ate their hamburgers. And so when I think about that, is there a morbid curiosity in me that would go like, I don't know if I can handle this? I do sometimes think I would like to see the full process of something that I am only tangentially involved in. But then another part of me wonders about, all the other trauma that I've seen with, people getting shot and killed and stabbed and killed and beaten down and everything else. Maybe I've seen enough. So I truly don't have a good answer to that. If it was actually presented to me, I might do it, because I feel like there's always something more that I can learn. And maybe that's been my real gift all along, is that I've never, ever once stopped learning.
Yeah, and Eric said he believes California DOC is the only U.S. prison agency with firearms inside the perimeter. That's a good.
I will tell you, yes, I've carried many.
Well, you guys, is California the only
many
one?
a fire. I don't know that it's the only one. I can tell you that when I showed up at San Quentin, we had firearms everywhere. And, we had gun rails everywhere, and it was useful. There were times where, we would be, firing shots inside of housing units. I've seen several, I mean, not an abnormal amount, but I've seen several different inmates get shot. And it was just one of those things. There's a lot of violence. We had an incident where a friend of mine was watching, and a whole bunch of let's just call it racial violence was jumping off on, I think it was the 3rd tier of, I want to say it was Carson section, and he ended up shooting a guy right in the butt, and it was with the 9mm carbine. And, there was just blood everywhere, and there were just shanks everywhere. And it was just, absolute chaos and bedlam to see that. But at the same time, I don't know what it would have been like trying to function in that without having guns on those rails, because, I mean, it was lit. Let's just put it that way.
Oh, wait, hold on. He said, no, the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation is not the only prison agency in the United States that allows correctional officers to carry firearms. I mean, for some reason, I could be wrong. I think Idaho may, because there was something I was reading about Idaho that mentioned something about armed escorts. But don't quote me because I didn't utilize that one. But I don't know. Maybe it is whatever it is. But hey, look it up. Eric, if you
got to understand though, those guns are not, they are not on the ground. In that fashion, they are in the housing units, but they're in secured areas. They're either in control booths, or in San Quentin's case, we had a gun rail that went, that wound through the whole perimeter, and so there were also ways to get those weapons inside and on the ground if necessary. But I never actually, had to see that. But there were times where we would run to the armory and be grabbing a rifle and then going up the staircase and around wall post one or down to the dining hall. Had a lot of stuff happen in the dining hall, as it were.
All right, so I got bullets prevents errors in high-stake irreversible acts, builds role familiarity, and ensures seamless coordination. So again, this is related to training and readiness. Prepares for contingencies like equipment failures or last-minute legal stays. Psychological readiness, it reduces panic by normalizing the process through repetition, strengthens confidence in each team member's abilities, and helps manage adrenaline and anxiety during the actual event. Emotional consequences, rehearsals can increase mental burden by repeatedly simulating a death. Long-term involvement may cause burnout, PTSD, or emotional detachment, and may shift attitude towards execution, either more hardened or more conflicted. Why it matters, it impacts both the precision of the procedure and the mental health of staff, determines whether execution teams are seen as competent, professional, or emotionally compromised participants, and influences public perception of the state's ability to carry out capital punishment with dignity. All right, Russ, 2 last questions. This is firing squad versus lethal injection. Which method do you think raises more ethical, legal, or procedural challenges, and why?
I think from what we've seen, it's going to be the lethal injection. For one thing, some states have had a difficult time procuring the chemicals. I think that it's also one of those things where it just appears that those chemical companies don't want to be tagged with that. I think that they're kind of a little bit overreactive, but that's not for me to say. I think that having to have certain personnel touch the inmate, establish a line. It seems a little bit more involved when you're trying to put a central line in someone. That's an actual surgical procedure, and doing that. I mean, I care mostly about those people and how they're going to react to it, and that's why I mentioned rotating them out after just one execution, because I think that that's appropriate. I think that we're a little bit more used to the idea of firearms taking a life. I think that there's less actual interaction with the inmate, because the people that are actually firing the bullets should definitely not be the ones that are seating him in the chair. I do worry a lot about those individuals that are having to secure him in that position, because that can be mentally traumatic. But other than that, I would say overall, from what we've seen most recently, it's the lethal injection part that has the most questions, especially in some cases with regards to, it possibly being a painful process. Not that I'm not concerned about it, but it puts a damper on what you're trying to do with regards to the death penalty itself. It is an impediment. And if you're going to have it on the books, there should be as few impediments as possible.
Yeah, you hit pretty much the bullets. Appears cleaner. So for lethal injection, it does appear cleaner and less violent to the public, but it faces legal and logistical challenge over drug sourcing, which you said, and carries risk of prolonged suffering from batch procedures. But what you also added, which was really good, is the personal touch of a lethal injection, as you mentioned. Firing squad, physically reliable, often leading to quicker death, highly visible trauma for witnesses and staff, if they're seeing that, and may be perceived as archaic or barbaric despite reliability. Legal procedural challenges, varying state laws and constitutional debates on cruel and unusual punishment, international human rights criticisms, and evolving legal standards that may render certain methods obsolete. Why it matters, the method shapes both the moral and the political debate about executions. Public perception may hinge more on optics than actual humaneness, and decisions about method reflect how a society wants to be seen in administering justice. Last question, and then we can wrap up.
I'm ready.
Death row conditions. What impact might years of isolation have on a condemned inmate's mental state before execution?
None. At least, from my experience, what I've seen, there was nothing resembling isolation. I won't say that there was no isolation, but I would say that for the most part, there was almost zero isolation. in the adjustment center at San Quentin, those individuals certainly were able to talk to each other back and forth, whether they liked each other or not. On the one side of the thing, there were some quiet cells down at the end, which were used to manage people who were either exceptionally violent or self-harming. And so they were in a position where they needed to be helped by that isolation itself. The types of yards that we used to have at San Quentin, they were out there with, 8, 10, 12, 15, 20 other people. Sometimes that's not isolation. I think people have a misguided idea, people always, throwing that, solitary confinement out there. Show me what's solitary about it. For one thing, that's not to say that, they have free reign of the prison, but it's certainly not isolation. It's certainly not solitary. And if it does end up being that in any, given instance, it's probably because it's called for. So another thing where I think that the American media has really fallen down on is actually describing those conditions or telling what it's really like, because it certainly is not solitary confinement, however isolative it may or may not be.
And guys, I'm agreeing with Russ 100%. There's such a political agenda here when it comes to that. And, he's going to be in solitary. No, he's in protective custody. There's interactions there, but they still want to paint the picture. And it's an impossible picture. Got to protect the guy. And then someone wants to throw, well, he's going to be solitary by himself, but you got to protect the guy. I mean, it's just, you can't win. So basically we just carried out the execution. If that was the case, that's what the show was about. What if he was sentenced? This is what he would have gone through. This would have been the what if situation if he was put on death row. This would have been the eventual if Idaho would follow through with the outcome of being sentenced and having it carried out. All right, Russ, let's wrap it up, man. Anything you want to say in closing?
Yes, a lot of these issues, I don't know if I want to say a lot of them, but several of them have touched on things that were in my book, Killing Complacency, Tactical Awareness for Correctional Professionals. So even if you are not a correctional professional, you might find something interesting in that book. I do really want to push that. I'm trying to get my sales up because I believe that this book is capable of saving lives. And so I wanted to put that out there. I think that this has been a great show. I think that, both Anthony and I have, rich depth of experience dealing with problematic individuals and understanding some of the ins and outs. You guys, if you didn't ask any questions now and you want to ask them in the comments later, in the next day or two, I'll keep trying to revisit it and put some more stuff in there for you and try and flesh things out for you if you have, some deep curiosity about it. But other than that, good night to everyone.
Yes, and guys, his book's on Amazon. I got books also on Amazon. Check it out. Books on inmate manipulation, books on undue familiarity. I have a lot of books, man. Russ is starting to now build up his little library, which is good. It's good to see that. And as always, guys, thank you for tuning in. I'm going to go ahead and share the video, and hopefully we'll have some more lives coming in the future. Wait, let me just see what's our last comment here from Margaret. Thank you, Anthony and Russ. Informative, interesting as always. Just ordered Russ's book.
Oh, thank you, Margaret. Yes.
You're awesome, Margaret.
I got that last minute sale. Thank goodness for that. Hey, Russ, so I appreciate that from the bottom of my heart, Margaret, because I think that book stands to teach people something, even if whether they're in corrections or not. It's really good looking at the psychological causes of complacency. And the last 4 chapters are all dedicated to real life situations that didn't happen to me, but there were a lot of real life situations in there that did as well.
Yes, and it's a good read. And as always, guys, stay safe.